Hello, adventurers, and welcome back to the Dragon's Lair. Today we will be discussing everyone's favorite uncle, the Dragon of the West, Uncle Iroh. So, let's jump right into it, shall we? Starting off with strength. It's implied that Iroh's strength score is going to be relatively low because he is an older gentleman. But, then we get to know him. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. He was a Fire Nation soldier. So there's a bit of a steam that comes with that, and you're going to have training and strength training, that sort of thing, right? So he's going to have a little bit of strength from there. But the majority of his strength comes from the prison episode, where dude gets jacked. Like, put barbarians to shame, ripped. So, for the sake of this, I'm going to be putting his strength score at 16 to 18 just because of the prison episode. Like, you really don't need a whole lot more than that. I mean...
Dude gets beef.
That's one way to put it. Moving into dexterity. Again, because he's an older gentleman, it's kind of led to the conclusion that he's not really fast. He's not strong, he's not fast, he's kind of an older man, right? Wrong. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. Uncle Iroh takes charge of Zuko, right? So he's with him, trying to guide him and lead him through whatever problem Zuko may face. One of the problems Zuko faces is Admiral Zhao. What at the time was Commander Zhao. In an Agni Kai, Zuko versus Zhao, right? Well, as I said, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, should still be good. Zuko wins the Agni Kai, but refuses to kill Zhao, which causes problems later on, but we'll get there eventually. Not in this episode.
Eventually.
I mean, it's kind of a thing for the show, not for me.
Oh, good.
But, you know, so... Zuko faces Zhao, beats Zhao, refuses to kill Zhao. Zhao decides that he's going to take this opportunity and strike down Zuko while Zuko's turned walking away. Iroh sees it coming and stops the attack, proving his dexterity because he's able to get there and stop the attack before Zhao can make it. To add insult to injury, Iroh also throws Admiral Zhao, or at the time Commander Zhao, back about 10 feet or more, which proves the above strength score, right? Because it's kind of funny, and a really old man just threw a commander back 10 feet. That's going to be really hard to do if you're not strong enough to do it.
He got yeet cannoned.
You're talkative today.
I know.
I like it. Let's keep it up.
I can try.
So, there is that. With that being said, I'm going to put Iroh's dexterity at 16 minimum, closer to 18 and 20, right? I would probably argue more towards 18 than 20, but 20 makes sense. Moving into Constitution. This is one of the few instances where the constitution of a character could be very easily defined. Could be.
Perhaps.
So close yet so far. So, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. There's a flower at one point in the show called the White Jade Bush. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, there's that flower, and then there's a different flower. One makes a delicious tea, and the other makes a very deadly poison. We're led to believe that this is the one that made the very deadly poison. Because it's kind of a, things happen in the show, we'll say. And Iroh survives, albeit with the help of medication. Now, that would lead to Iroh having a very high constitution score because he ingested a very deadly poison and was able to survive. However, it's not guaranteed, so it could have been the very delectable tea, as Iroh makes an offhand comment that the tea he made with it was good. Very good. In which case, Iroh had a very allergic reaction to the tea that he made and was only able to survive with medicine, meaning his constitution score would be low. So it's kind of up in the air still, even though we have this defining characteristic for it. Either deadly poison or very good tea, which Iroh was allergic to. So I'll leave the exact determination up to you, but my scores were 6 to 14, -2 to +2, to be specific, for his constitution score, depending on whether or not it was the tea or poison. Moving into intelligence. Iroh was a general in the Fire Nation Army, correct? Yeah.
Yes, I do. Yeah, General.
Yeah. So, because of that, we're going to know that he's going to be a very good strategist. And of course, he knows how to firebend and knows that sort of thing. So, given the fact also that because he was raised to be the next Fire Lord, he was probably taught things like the history of his nation and the strategy that was previously mentioned to be able to command an army force. So his intelligence is going to be relatively high. I'm going to place that somewhere along the lines of 16 to 18, with 20 not being out of the question either.
Yeah, it's big brain time.
Thanks. Moving into wisdom. Iroh knows what he's talking about, right? He constantly makes, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. In the beginning of the show, he's constantly saying things that would be considered wise sayings, although most of the time at just a random glance, it doesn't make much sense. But when you ponder it and think about it, you actually figure that there was some meaning behind it. For instance, one example of this is the pirate episode when Iroh informs the pirate captain and Zuko that their ship is setting sail because the Avatar and his group have stolen it, essentially. And Zuko just automatically assumes that Iroh is making some sort of weird proverb instead of being very literal and saying, hey, you're losing your ship. So things like that. Then throw in the fact that Iroh tells Zuko that drawing wisdom from one place becomes rigid and stale, but drawing wisdom from all of the nations can help make him whole. Kind of goes and proves some of his wise capabilities. Then you have the prison episode, where his wisdom culminates, right? Everything kind of comes together, where Iroh knows that he's going to need to escape, and in order to do so, he's going to need to get stronger and build up muscle, while keeping it hidden so he's underestimated on the time of his escape. He's going to need to know the route and the timing of the prison guards to where he can very successfully make his escape. Then he determines that he wants one of the guards to be fine and not get injured when he makes his escape, so he warns her to not be there for the rest of the day. And finally, he figures that he's going to need to wait till the day of the eclipse, when the Fire Nation as a whole is at its weakest. So he'll have the easiest time escaping. Now, that being said, he knows he'll be the weakest too. At his weakest point as well. But he knows that's the day he needs to make his escape. It's that thinking it through and waiting, as well as the fact that he's known for his wise sayings and tidbits of information throughout the show that puts Iroh's wisdom at 20. Then you have charisma. This is a relatively easy statistic to figure. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. Iroh is able to speak to almost anyone. He talks to Toph when she's trying to figure her way in her newfound freedom. And then he kind of, for lack of a better term, bards his way into the ferry of Ba Sing Se, where he sweet talks essentially the passport agent. So there's a bit of that going on as well. So his charisma is going to be relatively high. That being said, I don't think it's quite as high as some of his other statistics, so I'm putting it at 14 to 16. Just almost for sake of balance, and the fact that he's an amiable guy, but he's not the average bard when you think about them, right? So, that being said, let's move into race and class, shall we? Anything I missed, Chill?
So far, no.
Perfect.
Other than the Dragon of the West and Intimidation.
True.
Grr.
I mean, yeah. I did talk about that in the beginning.
Yeah.
So his nickname is the Dragon of the West, and this proves his wisdom score as well, where he was wise enough to lie about killing the last dragon, which earned him his nickname, the Dragon of the West. But he lied about it so he could preserve their species, because he knew that if he didn't, other people were going to be dragon hunters and go out and try to kill them. And with a name like Dragon of the West into Charisma, it's worth a few points of intimidation. Let's be fair here. Walk up against a guy named the Dragon of the West, you're gonna think twice about fighting him.
I'd leave.
Fair. So let's turn to race and class. Thank you, Chill. His race is obviously human. I went specifically the human variant. Now, yes, at a glance you get fewer ability score improvements, but you get an extra skill proficiency of your choice, and you get a feat of your choice. Now, I went with the skilled feat, meaning you get a total of 4 skills of your choice with this race. 1 for the race, and 3 for the feat. Technically, with a feat, you can have any combination of your of skills or tool proficiencies of your choice, but there's almost no reason to go tool proficiencies. They have their uses, but it's very few and far between. So skill proficiencies are going to be much more useful. I went Arcana to mimic the use of bending, Nature for the making of tea and knowledge of his surroundings, History because he was a Fire Nation soldier and is going to know the history of his people. And what was the last one? It's Insight for being able to read people like he does in Pai Shao. Thank you. And like he did with Zhao when he stopped the attack from hitting Zuko.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing. Moving into class. Any sort of caster, right, mixed with the martial abilities, because Iroh does both. He's a firebender, but he's also a really good fighter, and, he was a general in the army, so he's going to have some fighting abilities. So things like Druid, with an emphasis on fire, and a mixture of probably Monk or Fighter to be able to hit and hit hard. Now, I would think about allowing, at the very least, a few spells that are like augmentation spells for charisma modifiers. Something like, what did I list? It was...
Charm?
Charm Person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Something like Charm Person, which gives you help when talking to different people. So something like he would have done with the fairy when he sweet talks his way into essentially bossing Sect. That's a bit of an augmentation spell, and it kind of works with Iroh and what he has done in the show. But it's not necessarily a fire-based spell, so it kind of goes against the general thought of bending-based magic. It's DM's choice. Moving into the conceptual build of race and class. As for race, Fire Ganassi makes sense at first glance, but then you get into it and realize Iroh forms himself using all of the elements. Spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. For instance, when Iroh talks about using the other elements to make yourself whole, and the fact that his lightning bending technique was really a water bending move that he used to try to control the lightning. Things of that nature. So yes, Fire Ganassi makes sense, but it doesn't quite fit. Then you have Dragonborn. I thought about this. This makes sense with the Dragon of the West. Specifically, red, gold, and brass, I believe. Yes, brass. Because those are the fire types of Dragonborn, but then you also have things like it was
Strength.
bronze. No, hang on, I'm not done yet. Bronze and blue, I believe, Dragonborn, which are the lightning-based ones. So those could make sense as well.
Ah, yes.
Yes. I know I went a little off script for you there, but sometimes you just think of a few things. Then you have Furbolgs. They make sense with their very nature-based personalities and apparent love of tea. And then you get into Tieflings, which make sense for the fire-based magic, but then don't make sense for the personalities and general perception of their race. So there are just a few options for you. Class. The class that I want Iroh to be doesn't have a build that makes sense for it, so we'll get into the homebrewed portion of that here in a minute. Let's start with the one that makes the most sense, but is really the backup. A druid playthrough makes sense. They're very wise, and they're very nature-based, which is something that really kind of fits with Iroh. So that playthrough makes a lot of sense, and if you were to mix it with something like Monk, could make sense and work as well, because monks are wise, and they can hit hard like Iroh can. My playthrough that I would want to do of Uncle Iroh, hear me out. It's Bard. Here's why. Yes, it doesn't make sense with a statistic point of view, because Iroh's statistics are wisdom, intelligence, maybe strength or dexterity as well as the third stat. And bards are very charisma-based. But what I would do is I would homebrew it if I had the option. I would homebrew it to where instead of using his charisma score, he used his wisdom score. Everything else stayed the same. For instance, bardic inspirations, instead of some sort of song or musical number, you gave some sort of advice to whoever you were giving your bardic inspiration to. Or if you used the ability to hurt an attack against you, or help prevent an attack against you would be the better way of putting that. You gave some weird proverb like, "Can you not see that your own ship has set sail?" Where initially it doesn't make any sense, and then upon thinking about it, you gain clarity. Things of that nature. And you use his wisdom modifier instead of his charisma modifier. And that makes an interesting bard playthrough, and you get to play through as Uncle Iroh, which is cool. So there is that. Backstory. Iroh was the firstborn of Azulon, for which his niece Azula is named, and was next in line to be Fire Lord. Then at the loss of his son, and then subsequent loss at the Siege of Ba Sing Se, he returned home. Pretty soon after, Azulon died of mysterious circumstances, his last order being that Iroh was not to become Fire Lord, instead it was to be given to his brother, Ozai. After that, even though Ozai was still alive and now Fire Lord, Iroh essentially adopted Zuko as his own son, after having just lost his real son. And it was because of that, Zuko was able to sit in on a Fire Nation meeting, and that led to the essentially banishment, well, it was banishment, of Zuko. But because of Iroh's standing, Zuko was able to procure a ship and a crew. And of course, he always had Iroh by his side. That is where the story begins. Moving into items. Iroh never really had any explicitly magical items. However, there was the cursed monkey statue. That wasn't actually cursed, but a DM could use it if they so desired, where it would be a cursed item in their campaign. Just something to think about as a DM. So, that is all I have for you fine adventurers today. Questions, comments, concerns? Leave them down in the comments section below. I would love to hear it. And you may just help a fellow adventurer in need. If you can't possibly wait until my next video, which will be on Azula, make sure you check out my Discord, and you can always come hang out on Twitch. All links to my social media will be down in the description below, so make sure to check those out if you feel so inclined. Aside from that, I will catch you all later.